If I hadn't switched the glass that night, I might not be clear-minded enough to tell this story today. The retirement party was held right in the house I had lived in for more than 30 years. Nothing extravagant, just warm, familiar. My son said, "It's just a family gathering, Mom. Something simple." I nodded. At my age, I didn't need noise. I only needed familiar faces, people I trusted. My daughter-in-law was the one who organized everything. She smiled brightly, so brightly that it felt strange. But I scolded myself right away. Maybe I was just getting old, imagining things. My drink was already on the table, a glass of apple juice, what I usually drank every evening. I sat down chatting with relatives, listening to the familiar wishes, wishing you many more years. Now it's time to rest and take care of yourself. I smiled, but just as I reached for my glass, I saw my daughter-in-law step closer. She bent down very quickly, so quickly that if I had blinked, I might have missed it. I saw it clearly. Her hand covered my glass for a few seconds. No one noticed. No one looked. Everyone was laughing, raising their glasses, taking photos. Only me. When she straightened up, her eyes flicked toward me, not with concern, but with evaluation. My heart started pounding. I didn't stand up. I didn't ask questions. I didn't say a word. I quietly reached out and switched my glass with the one nearby, my son's. A small action, so small no one noticed, but a chill ran through my entire body. A few minutes later, my son started to feel unwell. He rubbed his forehead and said he felt dizzy. People laughed it off, saying he probably drank too early. I hadn't taken a single sip. I looked at my daughter-in-law. Her face went pale. Then very quickly she turned away. Not long after, my son asked to lie down in the bedroom. I followed, pretending to be a concerned mother. But in my mind, one thought kept repeating. That glass was meant for me. That night, after everyone had gone home, I took the remaining drink from the kitchen and poured it into a small bottle, sealing it tightly. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from instinct. The instinct of a mother who has lived long enough to know not every smile in a family comes from love. The next morning, I went to the hospital by myself. I told no one. The doctor listened carefully as I explained. He asked if I was sure. I only said, "Please run the test. I need to know the truth." While waiting for the results, I sat alone in the hallway. People passed by constantly, yet I felt as if I were very far away. I thought about the years behind me, about this house, about my son, whom I raised alone after my husband died. I never imagined I would have to be on guard against my own family. When the doctor called my name, I stood up. My steps were slow, but steady. He looked at me and said, "This substance won't cause immediate death, but if taken regularly, it can cause severe memory loss." I didn't ask anything else. I understood. And in that moment, I knew one thing. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I held the test results in both hands. Thin paper, black letters, but the weight of it pressed down on my chest like stone. The doctor didn't say much. He pulled his chair closer, lowered his voice, as if afraid others might overhear a truth too cruel to be spoken aloud. "This substance isn't used in standard medical treatment," he said. "It doesn't cause immediate death, but if taken in small doses, regularly, the person will begin to lose memory, judgment, and eventually the ability to make decisions for themselves." I asked only one question: how long? He looked at me for a long moment before answering. "A few months, possibly sooner, if the patient is elderly." I nodded. Not because I understood everything, but because I understood enough to know I was facing a plan. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I let the silence sit in the car. Every intersection I passed was familiar, yet everything felt foreign, as if I were moving through my own life, no longer certain I was still in control of it. They didn't want me dead. They wanted me confused. They wanted me to become an old woman who couldn't remember, couldn't decide, until one day someone else would sign everything in my place. That evening, my son called. "Remember to take your medication tomorrow, Mom. The doctor said it's important." His voice was normal, too normal. I looked at the pill bottle on the table, a new label, clear printing. Everything looked perfectly reasonable if I hadn't just held those test results in my hands. "Okay," I replied. After the call ended, I opened the bottle. The pills were small, odorless, tasteless, perfect to dissolve in water, perfect for no one to question. I didn't take it. Instead, I placed one pill into a small bag and hid it deep in a drawer. From that moment on, I made a decision. I would not let them know that I knew. In the days that followed, I began to observe. My daughter-in-law became more attentive. She asked if I'd forgotten anything, if I remembered to turn off the stove, if I needed her to write reminders for me. Anyone else would say, "What a caring daughter-in-law." But I could see it clearly. Every question was a test. One afternoon, I deliberately asked her, "What day is it today?" She looked at me, just for a split second, not concern, confirmation. Confirmation that their plan was working. Another night, as I passed the kitchen, I heard whispering. I stopped behind the door. "If this continues, we can file for guardianship," my son said. "Isn't it too soon?" my daughter-in-law asked. "No. Doctors say cognitive decline in the elderly can progress quickly." I stood there, didn't breathe loudly, didn't move. But inside me, something shattered. Not from fear, but because I had just heard my own son calmly discuss stripping me of my legal autonomy, as casually as talking about the weather. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in front of the mirror for a long time, looking at my aging face, the wrinkles, the gray hair. I asked myself, when did growing old become an excuse for betrayal? I took out an old notebook, wrote the date, the time, every sentence I had overheard. Then I turned on my phone, pressed the record button, not for revenge, but to protect myself, in case one day my memory truly was taken from me. Before going to bed, I placed the phone under my pillow. For the first time in my life, I was guarding myself inside my own home, and I knew this. If I didn't act now, I would disappear, not from the world, but from my own life. The next morning, I made tea like I always did. My hands moved through the familiar motions. But in my mind, everything had changed. My son sat across from me. He scrolled through his phone, occasionally looking up to ask casual questions. "Did you sleep well, Mom?" "Don't forget to take your medicine." I nodded, still the gentle, agreeable mother they expected. But this time, I looked at my son carefully. The baby I once held through nights of high fever. The little boy who used to cry when I came home late from work, now sitting in front of me, a grown man calmly guiding his own mother into darkness. I no longer blamed my daughter-in-law, because now I understood. Without my son's consent, she could never have done this. That afternoon, I pretended to have a headache and went to my room early, but I didn't sleep. Around 8 that evening, I heard them talking in the living room. I cracked the door open and stood in the shadows. My daughter-in-law's voice was low but clear. "I'm worried. What if Mom finds out?" My son answered immediately without hesitation. "She won't. She's already starting to forget." I held my breath. "Just a few more months. Once the doctor confirms she's no longer mentally fit, we'll file for guardianship. Then everything will be ours to manage." Everything. One word, but it included the house, the bank accounts, my signature, and my right to exist. My daughter-in-law asked, "Don't you feel guilty?" My son was silent for a few seconds. Then he said, his voice lower, "She's old. Sooner or later, it would happen anyway. What we're doing, it's for the family's future." I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out loud. Not from pain, but because I had just heard my own son call the destruction of his mother for the family. I stepped back and closed the door as quietly as possible. My legs felt weak, but I refused to fall. I sat on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Images flooded my mind. His graduation day, his wedding day, the day I signed over part of my assets so he could start his life securely. I never imagined that all of it would become the reason they decided to remove me. That night, I began recording. Not once, but every time they spoke. I hid my phone behind the bookshelf, in the kitchen drawer, under my pillow. I recorded every sentence, every plan, every mention of doctors, paperwork, guardianship. Each recording cut into my heart, but each one was also a shield, protecting me from being erased. A few days later, my son suggested, "Why don't you let me keep the house documents for you? If you forget where you put them, that could be dangerous." I looked at him. For the first time, I saw it clearly in his eyes. No longer family, but calculation. I smiled. Okay, let me find them first. I never handed them over. In that moment, I knew for certain. This was no longer suspicion. This was survival. Either I fought back, or I would become just a name someone else signed for on every document. Late that night, I opened my old notebook. On the first page, I wrote a single sentence. From today on, I am no longer a mother who only knows how to sacrifice. I am someone who must save herself. And I knew this. My next move would leave them no time to react. From that day on, I began to act. Not overact, and because old age doesn't need exaggeration to look fragile. All it takes is slowing down a little, forgetting a small detail, repeating a question that's already been asked. In the morning, I deliberately asked my daughter-in-law, "What day is it today, dear?" She smiled and answered gently, but right after that, I saw her glance at my son. A very quick look, very subtle. The look of someone who had just confirmed what she was hoping for. So I continued. I forgot my keys in the refrigerator, put salt in the sugar jar, wrote the wrong date in my notebook. Small mistakes, not serious enough to cause real concern, but enough to make them believe I was slipping. My daughter-in-law began to take care of me more. She offered to cook, reminded me to take my medication, suggested regular doctor visits. Anyone watching would say, "What a devoted daughter-in-law." Only I knew. Every one of those actions was a step forward in their plan. One afternoon, I deliberately dropped a stack of old documents. My son rushed to pick them up, his eyes lingering a little too long on the account numbers. "Let me keep these for you, Mom," he said gently, but his hands had already tightened around the papers. I slowly pulled them back. "It's okay. I still remember," I said. He didn't argue. But that night, I heard them whispering in their room. "She's really starting to forget. I think a little more time and we'll be ready." I sat on my bed, my back straight. They thought I was weakening, but in truth, I had never been more alert. I began preparing in silence. I moved important documents out of the house, piece by piece, never all at once, never leaving a trace. I sent copies to someone I trusted. I hid the originals somewhere they would never think to look. Every time I came home, I resumed my performance, slow, confused, easy to guide. My daughter-in-law gradually let her guard down. She started speaking freely in front of me. One evening, right there in the living room, she said to my son, "I read it. If she's no longer legally competent, we can apply for temporary guardianship." I was sitting there, holding a cup of tea, like an old piece of furniture placed in the middle of the room. No one asked for my opinion. A few days later, my son handed me a document. "It's just a consent form," he said, "letting me help manage a few things for you, just to make it easier." I took the paper and stared at it for a long time. Then I asked, "Can you read it to me? Tell me what it says." He began reading, slowly explaining each point. As he spoke, I listened carefully to his voice. No hesitation, no uncertainty. He was used to lying to his mother now. I nodded. "Okay, let me think about it a bit more." My daughter-in-law turned away, unable to hide her disappointment. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the darkness, listening to the clock tick, and I thought about a painful truth. They didn't need me dead. They only needed me without a voice. And I understood very clearly. When they fully believed I was truly fading, that would be the moment I struck. I opened my notebook and wrote one more line. They think they're controlling the game, but they've forgotten one thing. Someone who has survived a lifetime of storms doesn't fall because of a single performance. I closed the notebook, and I waited. I chose a morning with light rain to leave the house. I didn't tell my son. I didn't say a word to my daughter-in-law. I said I was going out for a walk to clear my head. At my age, no one questions an elderly woman needing a bit of fresh air. The taxi stopped in front of an old building, tucked behind a line of tall trees. The law office had no flashy sign, just a small, faded plaque. It suited the man I was about to see. He looked much older than the last time I'd met him. White hair, a stooped back, but his eyes were still sharp. "You remember me?" he asked. I nodded. "You're the one who helped me stand back up after my husband died." He studied me for a long moment, then pulled out a chair for me. I didn't speak in circles. I placed the test results on the desk, then the phone with the recordings. He listened. Didn't interrupt. Only occasionally closed his eyes, as if the words weren't new to him after a lifetime in law. When the final recording ended, he let out a long breath. "They don't want to kill you." "I know," I said. "They want to turn you into someone without decision-making power." "I know that too." He nodded. "Then you came to the right place." He pulled out a folder. "In this situation, there are two things you must do immediately, before they have a chance to file for guardianship. First, the trust. All primary assets would be transferred into a trust managed by an independent third party. No one, not even your children, could withdraw funds or sign on your behalf. Second, a new will. Everything is legal as long as you are fully competent at the time of signing," he said. I looked at him. "And if they claim I'm not?" He smiled slightly. "We'll record everything, video, audio, and we'll have an independent physician certify your capacity." The signing took place in silence. No flowers, no familiar witnesses. Just me, the lawyer, a doctor, and a small camera sitting on the table. I read every clause aloud, no stumbling, no confusion. When I signed my name, my hand didn't shake. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I had already made my decision. My son's name that was no longer listed as a direct heir. Before I left, the lawyer asked me one final question. "Are you sure you won't regret this?" I was quiet for a moment, then answered, "I'm not taking away my child's future. I'm preventing him from stealing my present." He nodded, said nothing more. When I returned home, my daughter-in-law was cooking. She asked where I'd been. "Just out for a walk," I said. "I was feeling tired." She helped me into a chair. Gentle, attentive, perfect. I looked at her. Then at my son standing in the kitchen. They had no idea that everything they were waiting for no longer existed. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote one final line at the bottom of the page. "The move has been made. Now all that's left is to wait for them to step forward and fall into the trap of their own making." I closed the notebook and smiled, and for the first time in a very long while. My son was the one who suggested it first. "Mom, the doctor thinks you should have your memory evaluated just to be safe. It's only a formality." He said it gently, with the voice of a concerned son, with the voice of someone who had practiced that sentence many times. I looked at him, then at my daughter-in-law, standing nearby, one hand resting on the back of a chair, as if afraid I might fall. I stayed silent for a long moment. Then I nodded. "All right, if you think it's necessary." I saw it clearly. The instant her eyes lit up, not joy, relief, like someone who finally sees the finish line after a long walk. On the day of the evaluation, my son drove. My daughter-in-law sat in the back seat, holding a folder of documents. I sat in front, watching the familiar streets slide backward. Every turn felt like another step deeper into the trap, a trap I was walking into by choice. The waiting room smelled of disinfectant. I sat upright, hands on my knees, but when the doctor called my name, I began to act. I walked more slowly, paused at the door, asked, "Who did the doctor call?" My son rushed to take my arm. "You, Mom." I nodded, confused. The test began. The doctor asked the date. I answered incorrectly. Asked who had come with me. I hesitated. Then called my daughter-in-law by the name of a distant relative. I saw her exhale softly. Just one breath, but enough for me to know. They believed it now. The doctor took notes, nodded. My son sat beside me, fingers interlaced. He couldn't hide the tension, but it was the tension of someone close to getting what he wanted. At the end, the doctor said, "I'll need a few more documents, but overall, there are signs of cognitive decline." My daughter-in-law tightened her grip on her bag. I lowered my head, like an old woman hearing a sentence. But before the doctor stood up, I looked up. My voice changed. Clear, measured, not a trace of confusion. "Doctor, I'd like to submit additional material." The room went completely silent. My son turned toward me, his face full of shock. "What do you mean, Mom?" I met his eyes. "I mean the things you never expected." The door opened. The elderly lawyer walked in first. Behind him, 2 police officers. My daughter-in-law jumped to her feet. "What is this? What's going on?" The lawyer placed a thick folder on the table, something very serious. The test results were presented. The recordings were played. Sentence after sentence filled the small room. My son's voice, my daughter-in-law's voice. Discussions about guardianship, about medication, about how mom is old now. My daughter-in-law began to cry. My son went pale. The doctor stepped back. No one spoke. I stood up, back straight, eyes clear. "I am not confused," I said. "I was pretending." I looked at my son, one last time as his mother. "You forgot one thing," I said quietly. "The woman who raised you is not so easily defeated." The officers stepped forward. No handcuffs, just a request for cooperation. But I knew, from that moment on, they had already lost. When I walked out of the room, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The room grew so suffocating I could hear the wall clock ticking, 1 second at a time. No one sat down. No one spoke. Only the recording continued to play, steady, cold. All we need is for Mom to be declared legally incompetent. Temporary guardianship will take care of it. The assets will eventually be ours. My son's voice, unmistakable. My daughter-in-law collapsed into a chair. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Her face drained of all color, as if the blood had left her body. She covered her mouth, but the sobs still escaped. My son stood frozen. His eyes were wide, but the confidence of a schemer was gone. All that remained was the panic of someone dragged into the light. "No, that's not how it was," he stammered. The elderly lawyer looked straight at him. "We have sufficient evidence to indicate deliberate poisoning intended to strip a family member of legal capacity." Each word fell like a hammer. The doctor sat down heavily, removing his glasses, his voice hoarse. "I will need to report this entire incident." My daughter-in-law cried harder. I was just doing what he told me," she said, pointing at my son. "He said it was the only way." My son spun toward her. "Shut up!" His voice cracked. Control was gone. I stood in the center of the room, quiet but not weak. "Enough!" I didn't raise my voice, but everyone fell silent. I looked at my son. "Do you remember when you had a high fever at 6 years old?" He didn't answer. "I carried you all night. The doctor said if I fell asleep, you might not make it." My eyes burned, but my voice stayed steady. "Today you didn't carry me through danger." "You pushed me into it." My son lowered his head. His shoulders began to shake. The police stepped forward. "We need both of you to come with us to assist in the investigation." No handcuffs, no shouting. But it was humiliation all the same. My daughter-in-law sobbed apologies. My son said nothing. Before leaving, he turned back to look at me. I never thought it would turn out like this." I nodded. "I know," I said. "You only thought about what you would gain." The door closed. The clinic room felt empty. The lawyer stepped beside me. "Are you all right?" I took a deep breath. "I'm fine," I said. "It's just that I've lost the child I once trusted." That afternoon, I went home alone. The house was silent, no footsteps, no whispers. I sat down in the old chair in the living room, the one my husband used to sit in every morning to read the paper. I thought I would cry, but I didn't. There was only a vast emptiness opening inside me. That night, I opened my notebook one last time and wrote, "The truth has been spoken, justice has found its voice, but the pain of a mother has no sentence that can heal it." I closed the notebook. Outside, the rain began to fall. What happened didn't end in that clinic room. In truth, it was only the beginning. In the days that followed, I received constant calls from my lawyer, not to ask whether I regretted anything, but to explain each step clearly, carefully, and in precise legal terms. A formal investigation was opened. The guardianship petition was immediately suspended. All documents related to my assets were frozen to protect the victim. The victim. I never imagined there would come a day when I would be called that, especially when the person who harmed me was my own son. My daughter-in-law was questioned first. She talked a lot, perhaps out of fear, perhaps to shift the blame. But the truth cannot be rearranged. My lawyer told me, "Your recordings are decisive. There's no denying them." I nodded. Not relieved, not satisfied, just exhausted. A few weeks later, I heard that my son had been suspended from his job, not because guilt had been formally determined, but because his personal credibility was no longer enough to hold a management position. People who once called him a devoted son began to fall silent. No one checked in. No one defended him. His reputation, the very thing he believed he would preserve after I lost capacity, was the first thing to collapse. My lawyer brought me the final confirmation regarding the trust. From now on, no one can sign on your behalf. No one can subject you to another evaluation without your consent. I signed the document. My handwriting was still steady, still clear. I was still here, and I was still myself. One afternoon, I received a message from my son. "Mom, may I see you once?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I put the phone down. I didn't reply. Not out of hatred, but because I understood that some meetings, if they happen too soon, only deepen the wound. My daughter-in-law was different. She sent a long message about pressure, about debt, about how she only wanted to secure the future. I read it, then deleted it. Securing a future is never a legitimate reason to trade away someone else's dignity. The house became strangely quiet. No one reminded me to take medication. No one asked what day it was. No one cared for me with suspicious eyes. I made my own tea, did my own grocery shopping, locked the door myself every night. I wasn't weak. I had only been treated as if I were. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror. I looked at my face. Older, yes, but my eyes were different now. No longer naive, no longer blindly trusting. I whispered to myself, "You lost everything because you believed your mother had nothing left to lose." I opened my old notebook. On the second to last page, I wrote, "Greed doesn't take assets first, it takes conscience, and once conscience is gone, everything else is only a matter of time." I closed the notebook. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. After all the legal procedures were finished, I had many things. Yet I was missing the most important one, peace of mind. The house was still mine. The assets were still in my name. Every right to decide had been protected. But every morning when I woke up, I no longer heard a voice calling, "Mom." The house felt too large, not because of its size, but because of the empty spaces no one could fill. I kept my old routines, making tea at 6 in the morning, opening the windows to let the sunlight in, watering the plants on the porch. I did everything slowly, not because I was weak, but because I wanted to feel that I was still alive in each moment. Some days I forgot what had happened for a few minutes. Then I remembered again, not because of medication, but because my heart had not healed yet. My lawyer called and asked whether I wanted to pursue the case further. I asked him in return, "If I do that, what will I gain?" He was silent. "I'm not asking legally," I said. "I'm asking about my sleep." In the end, I chose not to push things beyond what was necessary. Not because I was soft-hearted, but because I understood this. Revenge doesn't heal. It only prolongs pain. One afternoon, I went to the nearby park. I sat on an old bench and watched children running and playing. I remembered my son when he was little, how tightly he used to hold my hand, afraid of getting lost. I wondered, at what point along the road of growing up did we lose each other? That night, I opened my son's message again. "Mom, I know I was wrong." Just one short sentence, no request for forgiveness, no excuses. I read it over and over. Tears fell onto the screen. Not because I had forgiven him, but because I realized I was still his mother, even though he was no longer the son I once knew. I didn't reply right away. I wrote a handwritten letter instead. Not long. I am still alive. I am okay. But I need time to learn how to breathe again, not as a victim, but as a mother who has lost her trust. I didn't send it. I placed it in a drawer. That night, I sat by the window, listening to the wind move through the trees, and I understood something very clearly. Justice may give me back my rights as a person, but only I can give myself peace. And that takes time. I opened my notebook once more. The final page was still blank. I wrote, "Tomorrow I will stop living on guard. I will live to take care of myself." I closed the notebook. Outside, the sky was clear. That winter came early. In the mornings, I opened the window and let the cold air fill the room. I stood there for a long moment, breathing deeply. My breath rose in a thin cloud. Light. Real. I was still here, and this time, I was here for myself. I no longer waited for my son to come back with another apology, and I didn't lock my heart shut either. I let everything rest where it truly belonged. My son called one afternoon. His voice was low, tired. "Mom, I just wanted to ask if you're okay." I was silent for a few seconds. "Yes," I said, "I'm okay." Not cold, not overly gentle, just the truth. I didn't invite him back to the house, but I didn't forbid him from calling. Because I understand this now. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning to how things were. Forgiveness means not letting the pain keep running your life. In the days that followed, I learned to slow down. I joined a small art class for seniors. My first paintings were crooked and clumsy, but I laughed a lot. I planted more flowers in front of the house. Every morning I sat and watched them bloom, like a quiet reminder. Everything that survives a storm blooms in its own way. One evening I opened my old notebook. The first page held fear. The last page held peace. I didn't tear any page out, because every page was a part of me, both the pain and the growth. Before going to bed, I looked at the old photograph on the wall. Me, my husband, and my son. Back when he was still a child. I spoke softly as if to myself, "You are no longer the child who needs my protection, but I am still someone who deserves respect." That night, I slept deeply. No nightmares, no sudden waking, just the sleep of someone who has finally set boundaries in her life. The next morning, I made tea. Sunlight poured through the window, warm and gentle. I smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because I chose peace. If you're listening to this story, and you've ever been hurt by the people closest to you, remember this: you can love someone deeply and still have the right to protect yourself. Growing old does not mean becoming weak, and silence is never permission for others to harm you.